Hey everyone, welcome to Talks of Thailand. My name is Jon. Today's story is about a man who considered himself a Thailand expert. Yet unfortunately, he ended up losing everything he had. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, give the video a like, and let's get in to today's story. The furthest thing from my mind when I arrived in Thailand was that I would lose all my money and end up having to return home in a far worse position than I left in. Because if you had asked me back then what I thought was going to happen to me, I would have told you, without even needing to think about it, that I had finally found the place where my life was going to come together the way I expected. I really thought I knew what Thailand was about. I thought I understood the culture well enough. I thought I understood the girls there well enough. And more than that, I thought I understood the basic deal that sat underneath everything. I thought Thailand was set up in the way I thought it was set up, in a way that made sense to me as a guy who had spent years going there on holidays, the best holidays I'd ever had, where I would watch, listen, learn, and pay attention to everything that was going on around me. I believed I was painting a realistic picture of how things worked in Thailand. That's what I'm trying to say. I hate it when people always want to act as if a man like me would just arrive in Thailand completely blind to what actually happens there. I wasn't stupid or drunk on some convoluted fantasy of superiority. I saw myself as being careful and observant, somebody who had spent enough time in the country to not fall for the mistakes made by newbies, because I most definitely wasn't one. I thought the things that I saw when I was in Thailand were exactly like I saw them, and I guess that was where I made my first huge mistake. Believing things were real and not set up in a way to make sure guys like me have no chance. If I had thought, even for a single second, that things were the way they actually were, there would have been no chance whatsoever that I would have done the things that I did, or even spent time considering doing the things that I did in the first place, because no sane man would knowingly walk into a life where he was going to be sickeningly used, drained, lied to, and then discarded, as if none of what he gave ever mattered a damn. I am angry at the moment. In fact, I would actually go further than that and say I'm furious, and I have every right to be, because what happened to me should not happen to anyone. There is something deeply wrong about giving your trust, your time, your loyalty, and your money, but most importantly, your future, only to find out that the whole thing was an illusion from the very start. The opposite of what happened to me should have happened, and it's when I start having thoughts like that my mind enters a dark and foreboding place. The opposite should have happened. I should still be living in Thailand now, happy and content, together with my wife, settled into the life I spent so many years building towards, waking up in the place I chose, in the country I loved, with the girl I believed loved me, more than life itself. That is what should have happened. Because if I'm being honest about things, that's what all the evidence seemed to point towards. That is what my own experiences told me was possible, and that is what I believed I had fully earned the right to finally have. When I say to you that she gave herself to me in every sense of the word gave, I believed in the total picture of what was being presented to me, not just the words or the affection, neither just the closeness, but the whole feeling I had that she gave to me, that I was the one in charge. I was the one with the work behind me and the wherewithal to make her dreams come true, if and only if she always put me first. My mistake was believing with all the conviction that I believed it with, that because she wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, because she wasn't educated or very worldly, and because she never talked about anything other than basic human activities, such as eating, sleeping, and money, that she understood I was probably better suited to make the big and important decisions that needed to be made in our relationship. I'll go ahead and say it. I was a lot more intellectually capable than her, and because it was so obvious, I never thought for 1 second that she would believe doing some of the things we did were actually good ideas. But I did them anyway, and I have no idea why. I met her in 2018 in a bar on LK Metro, just off Soi Buakhao. In fact, I didn't meet her in the bar. she was sat outside with a few of the other girls that worked there, and immediately it looked as though she wasn't trying anywhere near as hard as the other girls were trying, and that was one of the first things that pulled me towards her. If you've been to Pattaya, you know exactly what I mean. The girls outside the bars and massage shops often try so hard to get you to go into their place, and I always felt very clever that I could spot the genuine girls amongst them, believing that the ones who looked uncomfortable or out of place were really only waiting for a guy like me to come along and give them a better life. By that point, I was 48 years old. I found out quite quickly that she was 20 and she had 2 kids. Usually, that would have been a deal breaker for me, but for her, I felt like I would willingly make an exception. At this point, I had already spent years going to Thailand, years watching the same scenes play out, years meeting girls who said the same things that she said that night. However, most of the time, the girls I'd meet would give off the same feelings that they were performing a part that they had performed 100 times before, and because of that, I had got to the point where I thought I could spot the difference between one type of girl and another. I had known plenty of Thai girls by then, more than enough to feel like I understood the basic setup, and I had become very confident in my own judgment, probably way too confident if I'm being honest with myself, but at the time it didn't feel that way. There was just something about her that felt different to me, and I know men say that all the time. I know it's one of those phrases people hear and instantly roll their eyes at, but I can only tell it the way it happened. I immediately resonated with the fact that she didn't seem as loud as the other girls did, and I felt by the way she looked at me that she was crying out in a way, as if to say, I've never met a man I like as much as you before, and I really want to get to know you more. Maybe that was all part of her play, appear innocent and shy and perfect in every way. Maybe that was part of the hook she was trying to sink into me, but at the time it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like I'd finally come across a girl who wasn't exactly part of that world, even though she was standing right in the middle of it. We got talking with each other after she took my hand and led me inside the bar, and within minutes, things with her just felt so natural. When you've spent as much time in Thailand as I had by then, you start to believe that you can tell when something is forced and fake, or real and genuine, and this really felt like she was real, because I believed I had enough experiences of what something fake felt like. Most of the girls I spent time with over the years, even the ones I felt like I really liked, always had the same way about them, like they were all following on from the same playbook somehow. Yet with her, it didn't feel like that in the slightest, or at least, it didn't feel like that to me. The way she was behaving, pretty much as soon as I met her, I took as proof that she really was a diamond in the rough, even though if I'd been thinking straight, I would have reminded myself that I was still sitting in a bar, and a few feet away from me there were scantily clad girls on stage who looked just like her, in exactly the same kind of environment. But at the time, I thought I was seeing with a type of clarity that I'd never seen with before. We had a few drinks each in the bar, then we left together and went first for something to eat, before becoming more talkative with each other. And straight away, I'm picking up on the fact that she's so easy to talk to, because it's like we don't have anything to talk about, because her English wasn't so great. But again, that attracted me so much. Something changed in me almost straight away through that night, because she wasn't like any of the girls I'd met in Thailand before, and when she left, I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about her all night and throughout the following day as well. I hate using the word different because everyone likes to think that's the word that guys use, but why did I do what I did if it didn't feel different? To me, it did. Throughout the whole of the next day, all I did was think about her, and I couldn't wait to go and see her again, which I did. I suppose it's from there that things started to move quickly. I really started liking her, and more importantly, I believed she liked me a lot as well, just by the way she talked with me, and the way she looked at me, and always stayed close to me, and always seemed to look at me for guidance whenever she needed guidance on something, even if it was just a minor thing. The second night she didn't leave, and the following morning I asked her to stay with me for the rest of my holiday, because I felt like she really was the one for me. For the rest of that trip, we spent all our time together. I'm not going to lie and say it was amazing, because it was better than amazing, And being with her just felt normal. And the thought of not being with her made me feel uncomfortable and scared. She stayed with me for the rest of my holiday, and by the time the holiday was going to come to an end, I'd already convinced myself that she definitely was the one, because I'd never felt that way before. We left it with her promising she would go back to her family in Isan, while I went home and decided what the next course of action was. I just really hoped that's what she would do, but deep down, there was that sense of uncertainty that said to me, what happens if she doesn't? I really believed she would do what she promised, and I think it's important to say why I was so convinced that she really was the one for me, and that she really was different to all the others. Before I even went to Thailand, my life at home had already started feeling like it was something I was just enduring rather than actually living, but at that point, the thought of Thailand hadn't even crossed my mind. Life in the UK was boring. I think that's the only word I can use to describe it. I was getting older, working a job I hated, paying for things I didn't want to pay for, doing what I was supposed to do, yet I never had anyone to share it with. It wasn't because I didn't try, but when I got to the age of 40 and there was nobody in my life that I was able to share it with, and I had no sense of purpose and no sense of accomplishment, that was when I started to feel like I needed to change things up if I wanted to give myself the chance of happiness. At the time, though, it was like, what am I meant to do? Continue doing what I'm doing for another 10 years and have nothing to show for it, apart from a little bit of extra money. I just didn't want to do that anymore, and I didn't know what I was meant to do about it. Thailand came up one day, and it's quite funny how it did, because I'd just gone to book tickets to go to one of the places in Europe that I always used to go to, but for whatever reason at the time, the tickets were considerably more expensive than they usually were. I looked at flight prices to other places, and Thailand came up as a place I could go for what was only £400 return. Add that to the fact that the travel agency I was using was selling Thailand as being a very affordable place to go, I thought why not go and try something that bit different. 2010 this was, when I was 40, and if I'd have known what Thailand would have done to me, I guess I don't really know what I would have done, but it definitely made me a different person. It made me happier and more content, all the way up until it didn't, so it's very difficult to say what I would do differently if I could have my time again. The only thing that is certain to say, I can't have my time again, so it's pointless thinking about it. I can remember arriving in Thailand and feeling a little bit out of place, not knowing what I was meant to do or where I was meant to go, but I did navigate my way to the hotel I had arranged in Bangkok, which was in a very central location. I was only going to be there for 2 weeks. I had a few days booked in Bangkok, and then I wanted to see what things went from there and what they were like on the ground, and decide what to do next, because I hadn't really done much research. It was about halfway into those 2 weeks when I found Pattaya, or what I would like to call home, because Pattaya felt like home more than my own home did, and I felt that way after I'd only been there for a day. I met 2 girls that I liked on that first trip. Nothing serious, but they were great to talk to and great to spend time with, and it was fun, but nothing ever came of those because it just didn't feel like it was something that could be real. Both of those girls seemed to have ulterior motives to be with me in the first place, and I thought I was very well capable of picking up on things like that. The problem then is you have to return home, and you realise what you're being taken away from, and I was taken away from Thailand. All of a sudden, it was when I returned home from that trip that Thailand became such a big part of my life. It stopped being a place I went on holiday and started becoming something altogether different. From that moment on, I kept going back every single year, and some years I even went twice if I could make it work, because in Thailand, I was me. I was happy, and I was the person I always wanted to be, and at home, I was the exact opposite of that. Because of the way I felt at home, I was able to work and save because I didn't want to spend any money. I wanted to save it for Thailand, and I spent a lot of time just planning for that next trip, sometimes months and months into the future, but it was what got me through the hard times, thinking about the good. Every single time I went back, I got a lot more comfortable with how things worked there, a lot more used to the place, more confident with the girls, and before long, I'd convinced myself that I knew exactly how everything worked there and what Thailand was really like. When I met her in 2018, I'm trying to tell you that I wasn't just a guy who had walked off the plane and that was it. That was my 14th trip to Thailand. I'd been there 14 times, and throughout those years, I'd met more girls than I care to remember. I'd heard the same things from lots of them, watched them do the same little performances, the same handshake, the same game of Connect 4, the same words used when talking about something. And because I'd been around for such a long time and seen this from all these girls, while I had great times with them and they were fun to be around and fun to be in the company of, none of those girls ever made me think something could be real, apart from her. Surely that should go some way for you to understand exactly how serious I was with her when I met her, because she really felt like a diamond in the rough, a one in a million, and she really seemed different. By the time I met her, Thailand already felt like home at that point. My real home felt like the place I was working and just spending time in to get to the point where I could finally live in Thailand, which I did expect to be able to do at some point, although I hadn't worked out when. When I met her, though, in 2018, that was when I started to think a lot more carefully about what the next step was. When can I move to Thailand, and what comes next? Because returning home without her that time felt so much worse than all the other times I'd returned home. When I got on the plane, I hoped that she would be on the bus back to her family's village in Isan, allowing me enough time to get back to Thailand for good. When I got back home that time, something felt very wrong almost straight away. And I don't mean wrong in the sense that I thought she had done anything. I mean wrong in the sense that going back to my normal life felt so much worse than it ever had before. Because this time, I wasn't just leaving Thailand behind, I'd also had to leave her, and that felt awful. That was a very different feeling to anything I'd experienced on the previous trips. Before her, I would go home feeling upset that I was no longer in Thailand, and I'd already be thinking about when I could get back there. But there was still a kind of acceptance there because retirement was something I hadn't spent much time thinking about. It was like Thailand was there, I wasn't, but sooner or later I'd get back. This time it didn't feel like that. This time it felt like I'd left something behind that I wasn't supposed to have left behind, and the truth of it is I had, her. Everything at home made it worse, because although calling her was the first thing I did when I got back home, and the thing I did most often to help me escape the drudgery of it all, when she hung up, it would hit me that she was so far away, and I didn't even know when I would see her again. The beauty of being able to speak on video was that I could see that she appeared to be in a village setting and not in Pattaya. However, she was reluctant to introduce me to anyone in her family or her kids, saying it would be best if we met in person, and I agreed with her about that. For the first month of being back, I was a mess, because I hadn't booked my next trip yet, but when that was arranged for the start of 2019, that made me feel a little bit better, and I sent her money for the first time as she was no longer working. I wanted her away from the bar because in my mind, that was the first test of whether she was serious or not, but I guess even if there were signs she wasn't serious, I'd already convinced myself she was. I had it fixed in my mind that if a girl truly wanted a guy like me, like she claimed to want me, and if she really saw something in me, then why would she want to stay in that environment for any longer than necessary? That was my way of thinking, and possibly, because of that very way of thinking, a moment where I could have been saved happened after I sent her money at the end of the second month. One night, when we were on a video call, I remember something happened that left me feeling very uncomfortable, even though I tried my best to brush it off. She was outside somewhere near her family's home, or at least that was what I believed, and we were talking like we normally did. She was outside in the same rural setting as always. I could see the same makeshift house that I'd seen on lots of other calls, when all of a sudden I heard a man's voice in the background. I couldn't make out what he said, but it didn't sound Thai, and I saw her face change for a second. She quickly turned the phone so her face was out of shot, then turned it back a few seconds later. I didn't hear anything else. Maybe she gestured something, I don't know. But as soon as she turned the phone back to herself, she was 100% normal, as if nothing had happened. I asked her, and she just said it was her father, and I left it at that. What else could I do? But the voice just didn't sound Thai. When we finished speaking that time, I just told myself not to be stupid. She's in her village and her father said something to her, and although the discomfort stayed with me for the next few days, Something like that never happened again. By the time I was on my way back to Thailand, around 6 months after meeting her, I had forgotten all about it, and I couldn't wait to tell her about an idea I had for how we could be living with each other full time within the next 12 months. Arriving back in Thailand, I really felt like I was on top of the world. That rush of adrenaline when I stepped off the plane was elevated that time because before long I knew I would be seeing her again. She was already in Pattaya, having arrived there the previous night, and the last time I spoke to her, she was already on the way. Knowing that I was only a 2-hour taxi ride away from Pattaya was such a great feeling, because after all the waiting, all the calls, and all the time I'd spent thinking about this very moment, it felt like everything would have been worth it. By the time I got there and saw her again, I felt relieved more than anything else, because seeing her in front of me again made everything feel like things were going according to plan. We spent the first few days just being together more than anything, not really doing very much, just spending time with each other, going for something to eat, being in the room, and just talking. It was in those first few days that I put my idea to her. I told her that if I worked for 1 more year, I should be able to retire at 50, and if I sold my house and put everything together, I thought I would have about £150,000. I also told her that at 55 I could claim my private pension, which would be around £1,300 a month, and in my mind, that meant the future was set. What I said to her was that if she wanted to, we could agree that we were going to get married, and she could wait for me back in Isan for around a year while I finished working, sorted out my house, got everything into place, and came back for good, so that we could start living together full time. When she said yes to that, I really believed everything was set. I thought that was it. I thought my future was secure. After those first few days, she asked if we could go back to her bar and see some friends because she said she hadn't seen them in a long time. I was happy to do that because I'd spent lots of time in lots of bars and I loved that part of Thailand. When we arrived though, people were saying hi to her and it felt like they were saying hi to her as if they'd seen her not very long ago. That's what it felt like, although I couldn't prove anything or point my finger towards anything, but they just felt like they were being very friendly, a lot more friendly with her than you would have thought, given that she supposedly hadn't been there for around 6 months. When we left the bar, it did stay with me for a bit longer than I would have expected it to have done, but what was I meant to think about it? After a few more days, I just put it to the back of my mind and told myself I was just looking for a reason to ruin what I was successfully building. Other than that, we had a fantastic time together. I was sad as the days were counting down and getting closer to the time I was going to have to leave, but also it was a countdown to when our life would begin. As the days were running down, I was noticing that she wasn't like your average girl, as I've already talked about earlier on. She was very simple-minded, but again, that's obviously why I was so attracted to her, because it was the basic things that she did so well, that she got enjoyment out of, and I really revelled in the fact that she appeared to be quite a lot less intellectually capable than me. I just thought, what a lucky girl she is to have met someone like me, who is going to be able to look after her and give her a good life. You might listen to this and think what I'm talking about may not make much sense, because on the one hand, I'm having little thoughts come into my mind that perhaps she's been in the bar recently, but on the other hand, I honestly believe I was the most important thing to have ever happened to her in her whole life, including her 2 kids, because of the gravity of the whole thing and the future I was offering to her. So I suppose that when I think about it now, everything felt like it was all falling into place so well. When I left, I did so as a newly engaged man, and we were one step closer to being together. It felt like everything had fallen into place. It had. Yet over the next year, our conversation shifted from the idea of living in Pattaya to a new idea of living in Isan, in our own house, in what she described as paradise. It was about 3 months after I'd arrived back home. That was the first time she mentioned the possibility of us living in Isan. To start with, I just brushed it off as being just one of many ideas that we were both having at the time, because of how exciting our futures were going to be. I didn't tell her no straight away, but in my mind I thought no, it's not for me. But I let her think that perhaps it could be a possibility, because if I did something like that, she appeared to be so much more happy and so much more willing to converse and do certain things the certain way and do things the way I needed her to do them, over video, like I felt like I needed her to do. I suppose I wanted her to be happy. We spoke at length for hours on end countless times, And throughout the time that I was there, I was quite sure that she was in Isan, like she said she was. She was always in the same location on video when we spoke, and there were no other incidents that happened like what happened before. No other people talking to her, asking her things all of a sudden. No shocks came my way. And by the time I'd been back for 6 months, things were definitely coming into place. And it was around this point when I was starting to actually entertain the possibility of following her dream of building a house in her village. I kind of understood why she wanted to do that. Given the fact that she had 2 kids who were living there, her family was there, I bet her life was there, and she really appeared to prefer that kind of environment over the environment in Pattaya. If I'm thinking about it now, all I cared about was being with her, because I felt like I was a better person with her. I felt like she was a better person with me, and that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day, believing that I wanted to do what was best for everybody, yet understanding that she wanted to do what was best for everybody, but I always was the one right at the top of the list. Maybe that's where I got it wrong. I thought she understood. Let's make sure he's okay first, then everything else can fall into place afterwards. You have to understand though, based on the fact that I'd been speaking to so many girls throughout my time in Thailand, that I'd never had these feelings before. I never thought a girl would do that for me, but she really appeared to be that diamond in the rough, that one in a million, like I've said so many times. As the months are going by, we're approaching the end of 2019, and what I said to her was, because we will need to go up to Isan to get married, let's have a look around, let's see what's available, let's see what's possible, and then we can make a decision from there. I hadn't been back home for the whole year, but I'd already hit my target around November 2019, so I decided to bring forward my retirement by a few months, get myself to Thailand to be with her, and start living what I thought was going to be my real life. First things first, I needed to get back there. Then we can spend a week just in each other's company, getting back into our old way of doing things, and after we've done that, we can go up to her village in Isan to get married, because I was really excited to be able to follow that dream that I'd had all my life of getting married. That had never happened, and I'd already promised her we would be able to look around her area, and I would be able to gauge how I felt there, and if I wanted to progress with her idea of building a house in the village, or if I thought living in Pattaya would be better. I guess I was powerless to stop anything that happened from here. I mean, I wasn't powerless, but I was powerless, because making her happy meant she did things that made me happy, and I thought the things she was doing were things that she loved doing. I thought I was her world. I really thought I was her world. Although I'd been to Thailand so many times by that point, and the feeling of arriving in Thailand never gets old, the time I arrived then at the end of 2019 was definitely the pinnacle of all my arrivals in Thailand. That time, she had even gone to the airport to meet me, saying she wanted to welcome me in style, given the fact that I was moving there. And you have to understand, everything she did, everything she said, all her actions were exactly like I wanted them to be, and like I thought they would always be. The thing is, if you've known someone for a long time, and they've always been one way around you, should there ever be a point when you can let your guard down and think this is who they actually are? I thought that was who she was, and I thought that was who she wanted to be. I thought that way from the day I met her. We spent a little bit of time in Bangkok, never really my favourite city, but okay for a few days, and then down to Pattaya for a week, getting back into the Thailand lifestyle. I found myself having to pinch myself more than once, just understanding that I was actually in Thailand, but not only that, I was retired, and my future seemed to be already predetermined, and it was a very exciting time. Again though, she wanted to go back to the bar where she used to work, and I was a bit uncomfortable that time, but I wanted to make sure she was happy, and I understood her need to go and see friends, because if we were going to be living in Isan, perhaps we wouldn't have much chance to come down to Pattaya. Although remember, I hadn't fully agreed that we would be living in Isan yet, although I suppose I had, because all she needed to do was show how happy that would make her, and I was willing to go ahead with things. I hadn't been back in Thailand for 2 weeks when we were finally going up to Isan. I'd wanted to be introduced to her family on more than one occasion in the past, and the fact that she was now allowing me to go and see her family and where she came from, see where she spent her time when I was working and getting everything in place to be able to be back with her, I thought that was a great sign that she understood how serious I was, and I thought it made it clear just how important I was to her. Her village was in a province called Buriram. Strange that I've heard that place mentioned more than once, and the idea was that we would arrive in the city, spend 2 or 3 days there, and once I acclimatized to that city, then we would go to her village. I felt like I was a real explorer when we were on the bus up to Buriram. I felt like I was going where most foreigners didn't go, expecting to see something quite backwards and strange. But as soon as we arrived, it was quite clear that this was just like a normal city. You could probably say it was just like a smaller version of Pattaya, without all the foreigners, and all the tourists, and all the girls, but there were a few bars that appeared to cater to foreigners, probably expats who were already living there. I immediately felt like it was a great city that I wanted to get to know more. We spent 2 days in a hotel there, and I think it's quite obvious that we did build in her village, so I might as well say it. But I think it was how great being in Buriram felt in comparison to being in Bangkok or Pattaya, and it wasn't for any other reason than that I felt special by being there, because there weren't many other foreigners there. It wasn't a tourist destination, and I really loved the way I could interact with local people there, and they weren't as guarded when it came to foreigners, because they just didn't see as many of them. Being able to speak to people like that, they were a lot more open to sharing how things worked there. It made me feel better about myself. I don't know if it was my fiance's idea that we would stay in the city for a few days because she knew how I would feel. I guess I had spoken to her countless times that I was always looking for something a bit different, looking for something a bit unusual that most people didn't do. Perhaps that's why she was pushing the idea of a house in her village. But whatever the plan was, I kind of had already decided that I wanted to live in Isan, and I hadn't even seen the rural side of it yet. It's amazing, though, how the thoughts of that time in my life, I can remember how happy I was and how amazing life was and how content I was, and thinking about how I feel now, it's just an entirely different thing. It's the polar opposite. Her village was around 25 minutes out of the city, going north, and I was very apprehensive, given the fact that I'd been waiting for this for a long time, but also very excited because in a way, I felt like I was going to be meeting the family that I would be joining. We actually found a place to rent a motorcycle, and because I had quite a lot of luggage with me, I paid for a few extra days in the hotel so I could leave my luggage there. It was only 500 baht a night, and it just seemed like the best idea. And if we had the motorcycle, we would be able to go around her area and look at lots of different things that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have transport available to us. She was the one driving the bike as we headed out of Buriram. That was a nerve-wracking experience because she wasn't exactly the best driver. But when you leave the city, things start getting more rural. Buildings fade out, and although you'd see new buildings everywhere, you get to a place where everything seems more set in its ways, more local and very different to the city. And we stopped about halfway, and I can remember just how excited she looked. And because of that, I also felt excited. We had something to eat and set off again, and before long we arrived. And although I had expected something quite basic, I hadn't expected it to be as basic as it actually was. I'd never seen that side of Thailand before. I'd heard about it, I'd heard guys talk about it, but I'd never seen it. And all I can say is, it was absolutely nothing like Buriram City in the slightest, but it felt like the sort of place where you could really have a great place to live. A great piece of land, a great garden, and maybe even a swimming pool. All these things that I'm thinking that we could have within my budget, and understanding that if we got a car, we could probably get to the city in less than 20 minutes, let alone 25. I'm thinking this after we've had the introductions and we got on the bike to go and explore. I knew all about the Thai traditions and the customs, and I'd already accepted this was something I was happy to do. I knew I would have to pay sinsot, and I'd already agreed to pay 250,000 baht, which I thought was a fair amount. I thought it was fair, given the fact that she was as beautiful as she was and as young as she was, and if she didn't have kids, I would have probably agreed to pay a lot more. I found her family to be very nice people. Nobody spoke English in her family, and she was the one acting as translator, but before long, this was after we'd arrived, had our introductions, gone off to explore and returned back to the family's house, we already had a date for the wedding arranged, which was in a month's time. The idea all along was to return to Pattaya after we had this arranged, but I just didn't feel like doing that. I thought, why not go back and stay in Buriram, and we can come back and forth and look into the possibility of this house, because we were both starting to think about this and getting excited about actually doing it, and I had already made up my mind at this point. When we left the family's house, I felt like everything had come into place so well, but it was only when we were on the drive back again, me sitting on the back, when something struck me that I didn't think about when I was there, but I wasn't able to explain it. I just thought back to all the conversations that I had with her when I was not in Thailand. All those video calls. I didn't think about them when we arrived at the family's house, but it was just then that something came over me. Something I promised that I would do when I arrived was to ask her to show me exactly where she used to stand when we spoke. But I was so caught up in the moment and what we were doing that it slipped my mind. What I'm trying to get across is that I couldn't recognize anything that I saw in her village. And I was thinking about that makeshift house that I saw in the video calls all the time, and where was that? Perhaps it was there and I was just being paranoid, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, knowing that I had no choice since we'd left. And I promised I would bring it up with her later. We did spend the next month in Buriram. We went back to the family's house. I did raise the thing about this house, and she made an excuse which seemed like it had already been planned. She just said that this was her aunt's house and they'd just knocked it down and are in the process of building another one. The thing was, though, there was a house actually being built and it was her aunt's, although I couldn't confirm that because she was doing all the translating. But I just believed what she said because everything else looked similar. We got married as planned. That was one of the best experiences I'd ever had. She looked really beautiful in her wedding clothes. The whole village appeared. I did everything the Thai way because it made me proud to be able to do that. And now that we're married, I felt like we could finally commit to what we were going to do. The fact that as a wedding present, her father gave her a piece of land, I suppose that sped up what was to come next, because this piece of land was about 1 rai. It wasn't right in the middle of the village, and it felt like it could be the place where we could spend the rest of our lives. Of course, at this time we've got COVID happening, and that gave me even more confidence that the idea to live in her village was the right idea. I would say this was the pinnacle of my happiness, and how quickly things went wrong from here doesn't bear thinking about. I arrived in Thailand with £150,000. That was my life's work. I sold my house and added my other savings to that, and I was due £1,300 a month at 55, which was 5 years away. And it wasn't like you hear those other guys who seem to try to do all the finance things themselves, yet still things go wrong for them. I thought it was the best idea to involve my wife in everything we were doing so she understood everything we had. At that point, I had already come to the understanding that she was not as intellectually well off as me, but even still, she had the right to understand exactly what we had as a family, what we were able to do, and what we weren't able to do. And I felt very proud to be able to explain to her in such a simple way that actually helped her to understand things. I had boiled everything down to the idea that £1,300 a month would be our forever income. I wanted to self-insure, so it was my plan to keep 2 million baht on hand for that, which would also be in the same account I would use for my visa extension. And because of that, we worked out that if we spent about £80,000 on the house, our car, and everything that we needed, that should leave enough money to cover our living expenses until I got my pension, and also it should leave enough money for emergencies, and that was good enough for me. We had spoken, as I've already said until I'm blue in the face, so many times about what we wanted to do after we started living, and I made it abundantly clear that I didn't really want to do anything. Wake up late, stay around the house, cook nice food at home. I did want a cheap swimming pool and a little place to sit outside, and maybe we could go away once every few months, and that was what I thought we both wanted. Every time I talked about this being what I wanted to do, she always would chime in and say it sounds amazing. That's exactly what she wants to do too. And that was one of the things that made me love her as much as I did. It appeared that she wanted to do what I wanted to do. It felt like we both had the same hopes of what was going on. I thought we were on exactly the same page. That's why I agreed to this. That's why I paid the initial deposit for the house. That's why I kept paying as each installment was due. And about 4 months after we started on the house, that's when I invested in a car which I gladly put in my wife's name. She had her mind set on a big 4-wheel drive pickup, but I wasn't about to buy a brand new car, and we didn't need it. But we spent 300,000 baht on an older pickup which I felt did the job. I also bought a bike as well, a proper bike, not one of those scooters that most people seem to have there, and although it was my intention to put the bike in my name, it's just so much easier to put it in hers. I didn't have the address proof from immigration, and we had so much going on with the house that it just felt like a good idea to save time and put it in her name, which I did. Throughout the construction, we were living in a rented place about 10 minutes away. It was in one of those Thai-style villages that you see built on the outskirts of cities. That was a very cheap rental and a nice house. But the thing I didn't like about it was the land was so tiny, so we couldn't do anything outside like we would be able to do at our own house. I thought that was why you bought or built in the countryside, because you could have more land to do more things. It was only a few months later when the house was built, and it was the first shock because when everything was said and done, we had gone in over budget. At that point, I'd spent about £90,000 on everything so far, not including living expenses since arriving in Thailand, and not including the sinsot I gave to her family. But we had everything apart from furnishings in the house. Given the fact that the house was quite big, and we needed a lot of things, that was going to be at least another £10,000, probably a lot more if we wanted decent stuff. Sadly though, I wasn't really concerned. I just thought I would have a little bit less emergency money, but never mind, I would aim to top that up as time goes by. When we finally did move in, with all the COVID struggles happening at the time, all the difficulties around that and restrictions in place, it was coming up to the end of 2020, and I guess in total I had about £35,000 left to my name. That alarmed me because I knew we had just over 4 years until I got my pension. But on the other hand, when I looked at our house, when I looked at my wife, when I looked at the fact that throughout the whole of the time that we'd been building, everything that we'd been doing together since then, nothing had ever been said or discussed other than what we were doing. She hadn't wanted anything or demanded anything or done anything to scare me. So I just thought everything's good and we can start living and enjoying our house as long as we're careful. If only I would have known though. I'm not saying things started to go wrong as soon as we moved in, but they might as well have. And I can promise you that not once since I'd met her, not once since we discussed the house, not once since we started building the house, has she said anything about her family moving into the house with us, or expecting me to fund her family as well as her and me. She knew what I had, and I even told her that this was ours, this is our money, our family's money. But that just doesn't mean you can spend it and do things that we haven't talked about, and I thought she understood that. After we had the housewarming party, it was just one of those situations where a few monks come in and bless the house and splash water around on the people kneeling in front of them, and I thought it was a fun experience. It was after that when she told me that her mother and father were going to move into one of the rooms, and her 2 kids would be living in the same room as her mother and father. I thought she was joking, and I actually started laughing when she said that, because this was something we hadn't talked about before. But when it was clear that she wasn't joking, I didn't want to be angry because there were a lot of people there, and I didn't want people to think badly of me. But I did have to take a few deep breaths and explain to my wife that we would talk about this later. By the time everyone had left, that's when I asked her what was she talking about. Where did she get that idea from? We never talked about it before. And she just said that that was what people did in Thailand. I told her I'm not happy with this because I wouldn't have built the house if I knew that that was your plan. I don't have a problem with people staying occasionally, but I don't want to live in a house that I paid for and have your family move in, because although they were very nice people, they had habits that I wasn't really used to. I just hoped that she would see reason and listen to me and understand that I was the clever one. I was the guy with the money, the guy there to make her life better. I knew what was best. I'd always believed that she believed that I knew what was best. So when I told her that this wasn't a good idea, and perhaps tell them that this can't happen after all, instead of her just saying, okay, I'm really sorry, I didn't know, she stormed out, saying she can't say that to her family, and told me to go and tell them, knowing full well I don't speak the language, and they wouldn't understand. I just stood there in a daze, not knowing if what I'd heard had actually been spoken by her, because that was the first time she'd ever done anything like that. But even then, I didn't put 2 and 2 together and think that this was her plan all along, and now she had the house. It was time for her to change. I didn't pick up on that until she came back the following day. She left the whole night, came back the following day saying she was sorry, but she just thought that I understood how Thailand worked. She said, why did I go to Thailand if I didn't like Thailand? And I told her I love Thailand, and I love everything about Thailand and you, but your family living with us was not something we'd ever spoken about. She tried to say to me that she never talked about it because it was so normal in Thailand, and I was pushed into a corner and felt like I had to agree. I thought maybe it wouldn't be too bad. So, only 2 weeks after we moved in, a family were now living with us, and it wasn't okay straight away, because although, and I need to say this again, they were very nice people, they were a lot noisier than I was used to. They woke up earlier than I was used to, and although they weren't deliberately trying to make noise, I often found myself waking up in retirement at the crack of dawn, not something that I had planned to do. Then there was the situation of not wanting to use the Western kitchen that I'd installed, instead wanting to use an outside kitchen, but they would cook with charcoal and the smell would come into the house because my bedroom was adjacent to where they cooked. I didn't say anything for the first few days, but one morning I woke up before 5 a.m. and there was thick charcoal smoke inside the room, at least my room, and I exploded, shouting at the top of my voice, which woke up my wife, and she looked shocked, saying stop shouting, but I couldn't. I stormed out of the bedroom and went and pushed over the little charcoal pot that her family used to cook, and whatever it is they were cooking, I have no idea, spilled onto the floor, and the charcoal landed on top of it. And then she came out screaming at me, saying, "How can you do this to my family?" I just had to look at her and tell her they're not meant to be living here. I tried to ask her, tell your family exactly what the truth is, that they weren't meant to be living in our house with us, but she didn't want to hear it, and her family looked shocked. She just said something about the smoke problem, and I didn't like it. It appeared that everyone was looking at me like I was the one in the wrong, not understanding that everybody else was in the wrong, not me. I was already at my wit's end, and I'd only been living there for not even a month. I think I might as well be as concise as I possibly can and say what happened here. I found myself having to apologise to her family just to get back on her good terms, but it kept happening. Then I was asked for money to help her family with a business, just some farming thing. Business would be a very kind word to use to describe it, but my wife sold it to me that if I invested in this, they would be able to make better money, and they would then be able to build their own house. They could move out quite soon. Within a year, all my money was gone, trying to do everything I could to get her family out of the house, giving them money to try things, helping them when they were struggling, trying to be the best version of myself so that hopefully they would be the best versions of themselves and give me the retirement back that I wanted. But no matter what happened, it just wasn't working like that. I never expected to run out of money before I could claim my pension, but at that moment I wasn't even thinking about money. I wasn't thinking straight because I was just trying to get my retirement back on track. I guess I just made everything worse, and I should never have done what I did. From the moment I met her until the moment we moved into that house, she was one person. She was a dream. She was everything I always ever wanted in my life, and I thought the time that we'd been together was long enough for me to think that that's who she really was and would always be. As soon as we moved in, it was like a light bulb changed. First with the family moving in, then with me giving money to her family in the hopes that they could make their own money to get their own house. All the fallouts, all the arguments, all that money that I lost, and I'm still not happy because I'm not getting on properly with my wife. I ended up walking away, approaching the end of COVID, with about £5,000 to my name, completely disillusioned and also really shocked about how something like this had actually happened. All those warning signs that I should have probably paid more attention to, the fact that I couldn't really recognise her village, it didn't appear to be the same location as the one she called me from, and I called her from all those times. The time when someone called out her name and it didn't seem to be a Thai voice, and she turned the phone away. The times when she wanted to go back to see her friends in the bar, but they all seemed very friendly with her, as if she'd been there recently. All of those things would have been enough for any sane guy to have put two and two together, but I was just so in love with her. But most of all, I thought she loved me more than I loved her. I honestly, hand on heart, believed that I was the most important thing for her, more important than the rest of her family combined. And when she started putting her family first, as soon as we moved into the house, it sickened me. I wish I'd have known that her family would always come first, but I didn't. And after going back to Pattaya and spending a week there, hoping for some kind of miracle, I had to face facts that I'd just thrown away my life savings. And although I would get my pension at 55, that wasn't going to be enough to live back at home, and I didn't even have a house to live in. That's where I am today, bitter, angry, furious, devastated, wishing that I could do anything to go back in time and not give her all that leverage over me. The thing was, though, as I've been abundantly clear throughout my story, I didn't think she had any leverage over me because I thought the time that I spent with her up until the time I found out the truth about her was enough time for me to believe that I knew who she was. I didn't know who she was, and it was not knowing who she was that cost me everything that I had. Thanks for tuning into today's story, guys. I really do appreciate it. If you're interested in exclusive stories from both Thailand and the Philippines, please check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Patreon is going to be the place where I can continue bringing stories to you guys well into the future. Got a couple of things going on at the moment, so we're delayed with videos on this channel and on Patreon. But give me a week and everything is going to be back to normal. Cheers, guys. Really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next story. Bye for now.